Good morning. I can barely see any of you, which is great. The start for this morning when our host said, "We want your honest feedback," that is in fact not true. Don't do any of that for me. But most importantly, thank you for your time this morning. And there's a couple things I need to say to kind of get things cleaned up over here. So before we begin, we're required to say that what we say here on this stage, the opinions expressed here today are our own, and they're not necessarily the opinions of the Department of Defense or the Navy. The second thing we'll say is that everything we're about to talk to you today is either available fully on class, open source research. You can find everything we're going to say on the internet, probably a lot of things you shouldn't find on the internet. But also, if you would like a look at the game report, version 1 from last year is available on our website, and that's releasable. And then version 2 will be available in a couple of weeks as we clean up and send it through security review. And then finally, I think I saw Dean Parsons before. He may have gone off to do actual work, but I want to thank him personally, because before we set out on this journey, we took his ICS course for leaders. And it really gave us the language that we needed to understand and the systemic understandings we needed to have these conversations with our colleagues in Taipei. So thank you for that, and thank you, Sam. Okay, this is not a terribly technical talk, but this is more a briefing, sort of a DoD briefing to inform practitioners and private sector vendors of the threat and also the opportunity. And so let me just give you some context here if you're unaware. So there's some serious geopolitical tension regarding the independence of the Republic of China, commonly referred to as Taiwan. And that independence is currently threatened openly by the People's Republic of China, the PRC, or what we know as China here in the United States. There's increasing concern over the PRC's intent to take Taiwan by force. And there's also, as a potential lead up to that, to do so and to attack through cyber means to degrade and destroy Taiwanese civilians' trust in their own democratic system. So we're very much talking about state-sponsored attacks. We're not talking about criminality here. Okay, over the past 2 years, the volume and sophistication of cyber attacks against Taiwan has spiked, particularly in 2023 and 2024 during their election period. They began with, in 2023, approximately 1.2 million attempts per day, intrusions into the Taiwanese government and private sector systems. And in 2024, that doubled to 2.4 million attempted intrusions every day. Now, an intrusion attempt is an intrusion attempt. But in particular, those attacks were primarily against communications and critical infrastructure systems. And so this is the framing that we want, help people to understand what's going on, sort of the volume of it. Okay, so how did this get started? So in 2023, I came back out of the Pentagon and rejoined my colleague at the Naval War College. And we were watching the Russian incursion into Ukraine, and we were admiring the very interesting way in which the private sector was cooperating with the government to stand up what was continued attacks, both physical and cyber means, attacks on industrial control, power in particular, but also ports, also telecommunications. So as we're watching this happen, we're watching this fabulous attempt by all parties to keep standing comms back up, to keep standing energy back up. And I said, that's interesting. I wonder if the Taiwanese are taking notes. And I wonder if it's possible for the Taiwanese, who live in an entirely different context, to defend themselves in the same way, to maintain some kind of resilience of communication. So we referred to this as the Zelensky playbook, and we asked, I said, Jay, do we think, it was very much a very casual conversation, Jay, do we think that the Taiwanese could leverage the Zelensky playbook? And what resulted is the 3-year study that we have launched on, very ill-advised, with a lot of energy, and it's been fabulous. Jay, take it away.
Thank you, Nina. Yeah, so once again, Jay Vogt, I am a war game designer. And so what I'm going to do this morning is walk you through the game design that we created, and then talk you through the findings that we learned both playing at DEF CON, but also in Taipei. Before I do that, though, just to give you a little bit of a lay of the land in Taiwan, Nina kind of hit on the threat piece of it, but the critical infrastructure side may be a mystery to many of you in the audience. So just to kind of set the frame here, Taiwan, island nation, about 100 miles off the coast of China, 20 million people, largely arrayed along their western coast. And so it's a very densely populated island. And the bulk of those people actually live north in where Taipei is, the major city, so in greater Taipei. Their energy infrastructure is a little bit brittle. And so while the majority of that population and much of their industry is in the north, a lot of that power generation happens in the central and south. And the primary means, the majority of that is thermal powered by coal and liquefied natural gas. That is about 60% of their energy comes from that. In fact, the largest, I think, coal-fired power plant in the world, maybe still operational, is there. So they import 90% of those fossil fuels, 90%. So they're critically dependent on international suppliers. The other part of the energy, which I think is important, is that historically about 20% of their energy came from nuclear, but due to political reasons, they are denuclearizing and they are moving heavily into the renewable space, particularly solar and wind. And they are connecting those to smart grids and smart cities that exist throughout the island. So that's kind of a little bit on the energy side. On the communication side, Taiwan is on the edge when it comes to digital communications. There's fiber optic cable everywhere. They're at 5G, looking forward to 6G, and everyone is connected and everyone is communicating all the time. That being said, the off-island communications are dependent on, you can see them there on the right, I think there's now 15 subsea cables, which are very vulnerable to disruption. Those cables have been cut dozens of times in the last year, sometimes by accident, other times probably on purpose by the PRC. The Taiwanese government has taken notice of the things in Ukraine. They realize their vulnerabilities, and they are also investing in satellite communications. PLEO, they use Utel OneWeb, which is different from Starlink. It's a different company, but it's a similar idea. They're also investing with a US company called Astronis to get a MEO satellite as well to help them. So anyway, that's the lay of the land in terms of communication. Now we'll get to the game. So like most war games, this one starts with a map, but instead of focusing on units and military actions, this game is about critical infrastructure protection. So we had to focus the game on that. So you see the map of Taiwan there on the left-hand side. And the first thing we had to do was add the ports, right? As I mentioned before, most of their fossil fuels are imported. That's a critical supply of energy. So if those port operations are disrupted, either by cyber or potentially other means, then that would cause a critical problem in the electrical sector, which would ultimately affect their communications, because without power, there is no communications, at least once your battery backups run out. So from there, the coal and the natural gas, which can be delivered to a limited number of ports, gets moved to the power plants. As I said before, mostly thermal is their primary. Nuclear is going away, and once again, going big into renewables. So that is where the power is generated, and then obviously has to be distributed throughout the island via transmission lines and their associated substation transformers. At that point, energy actually gets to the people, as you all well know, powering their homes, their industries. Taiwan is a powerhouse in the industrial sector. Most people know about Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing. They actually have a whole host of industries there, and they are power hungry. They use way more power on average than you'd see in other industrial states. And obviously the population gets connected there too. So from there, we're talking about communications. And for most people and businesses, we're talking about mobile and internet connection. And those are the two things that most people associate with that. Once again, mobile networks everywhere, and that internet is very dependent on both the on-island companies that run their internet and mobile services, but also they're critically dependent on the connections to the outside world, either through subsea cable, which you can see laid out there, or satellite. If you're trying to get data on or off this island, it's only happening those two ways, either subsea cable or communications. So communication satellite. So now that you have sort of the lay of the land, we're going to talk about the game and all the different threats that can be pushed against this. So Nina mentioned we first played this game at DEF CON and we played it in Taipei. And so this game was very much dependent on basically bringing experts in to discuss and talk about what they knew. So we recruited 27 people, this is for the DEF CON game, in threat intelligence from lots of companies that you've probably heard of. We had a core member of people who were ICS and SCADA cybersecurity experts. Those were kind of our VIPs, because we had about one for each team. We also had a few folks in data center operations, internet mobile comms, and then we had a few regional experts who knew less about technology, but kind of understood the region. So we divided those people into 3 different teams, and they were all sort of blue. They were all kind of the good guys. They served as advisors to the Taiwanese government, and their job was to come up with solutions that could help them with their critical infrastructure. So to do that, we first presented them with a scenario. It was a 2030 scenario, and it was not focused on conventional military attacks. This scenario was focused on cyber attacks, electronic warfare, and sabotage, physical sabotage that you might see like a clandestine spy network or maybe special forces do. Those were the 3 types of attacks we focused on. And so those attacks essentially happen on the island. We give them a scenario in which, sort of bad things happen. A lot of our cybersecurity attacks focused on attacks on green infrastructure and the associated networks that, they sort of use those to manage. That was where we focused the energy on, at least on cyber, as well as data and communications. So after being presented with this scenario, we brought them back to 2024, and we said, okay, you guys have seen these bad things happen. We now want you to think about different solutions and investment strategies that the Taiwanese government could take. And we asked them to do this in 3 areas. One was in physical infrastructure upgrades, like what could you buy now to make yourself more resilient in the future? The second was cybersecurity upgrades. And so this was, hey, are there software-based solutions that you could come up with? Or maybe are there best industry practices that could be used that could help improve things? And the last one was recovery or repair. So we assume all those bad things have actually happened. And now your job is to sort of get things back online. So those were the 3 sort of topic areas, and they had to come up with ideas for each one of those. The players then presented their ideas, and then we had the different teams actually got to vote on what they thought were the best. Couldn't vote for their own, they had to vote for someone else. And that was kind of how we judged what were the most popular ideas. So what did we actually find? There were 65 different recommendations that the players in the DEF CON version came out. And you can see kind of the numbers in terms of how it laid out. 70% in infrastructure, 20 in critical spare, in recovery, which focused on stockpiling critical spares, and then 10% in cybersecurity. You might be like, why was there only 10% in cybersecurity? The truth is, the way we collected data is that we listened to all the teams as they were talking, and we wrote down all of their ideas, not just the ones they sort of presented. And so they threw out a lot of different ideas about what they could buy. They had fewer suggestions in the cybersecurity, but those actually tended to be very popular in the voting. So they tended to be much more feasible, and they got a lot of traction when it actually came to voting time. The players also developed 3 different strategic approaches to how the Taiwanese could think about this problem. And I'll talk about them more in depth in a minute here, but they were a decentralized approach, a centralized approach, and then what we called the interior approach, which is about moving critical infrastructure basically away from their coast into the center of the island. So in terms of what won, so what tended to get the players to say, hey, we think that's a great idea, it is what we like to call the cheap and the many, right? And so this was about purchasing large numbers of largely existing technologies. So you can think ham radios, other sort of terrestrial comms devices. Raspberry Pi mesh networks was a big one that came up a lot. Microwave relays, which the Taiwanese are actually very, very good at because they have to move a lot of data on and off the island to islands that are outside of Taiwan. Those were sort of like the key ideas. They also came up with ideas like, hey, if the power goes out and the mobile networks aren't working, maybe we could use drones or balloons to sort of augment the cellular capability. And then also ideas about how to keep communication secure and going when the power is out. And so this was everything from using apps that use peer-to-peer Bluetooth to send secure messages, kind of using the cell phone network that exists without the tower, and also using crypto and hashtags to make sure that you could verify that it was from a government entity. So anyway, this is kind of what the players voted for the most. On On the power generation side, once again, it was a lot about stockpiling critical infrastructure or spares and some other ideas. There was a large focus on modular nuclear reactors, which we agree would actually be probably a fantastic way to do this. But politically, Taiwan does not want to go back to nuclear. They're moving away from it. And so that wasn't really feasible. They also suggested things like tidal wave generators and some more like out-of-the-box things, which we just didn't think were mature enough or would be kind of too expensive to, outfit the whole island in. So we kind of dismissed those as being viable options. Really, though, the players doubled down on the renewable strategy, going both on the solar and wind. They were a little worried about solar, that the panels could be, corrupted or the stockpile reduced because a lot of it comes from China. And then also stockpiling batteries, which you see is I think a grid scale battery backup there on the right. Things of that nature that could be distributed in a number of ways throughout the island. The other thing this actually surprised us that the players talked a lot about. Like we brought a bunch of technical experts and we thought we were going to get a bunch of technical solutions. They spent more than half their time talking about how to make the society more resilient through training and other means. And so they threw out a ton of ideas. And this was everything that was kind of on a low cost and didn't require too much political will. Public messaging campaigns to say, hey, cybersecurity awareness and that sort of thing. They also talked about using government or military training to train the civilian population so that they would be better prepared to handle both cyber threats as well as get communications back online. And then one of the most popular ideas was a civilian cyber or hacker corps, basically an elite group that could be trained to do kind of all these, Gucci type things to include on computers, but also maintain digital communications equipment in the event. And obviously these things have different costs and would require different levels of buy-in from the society. Okay, so the strategies. Once again, 3 different strategies that they came up with. The first one was a decentralized strategy. And so this went very well with the cheap and the many. And so what they said is, hey, like, Taiwan's this like dense urban environment for the most part, or the Taipei is. We can spread stuff around. So each neighborhood can have its own power generators. We can hook those up to solar panels. We can get them, satellite communications and the whatnot, and basically build an internal network to those neighborhoods, and then spreading that throughout the island. That is a great idea. It would be, it could potentially be very resilient, but it does require a huge amount of buy-in from the population because you're not going to have government workers like running around the whole city during a conflict, fixing everything. It would have to be on the people to do that. And so they'd have to have some skills and baseline training to make it work. The next strategy, there we go, was a centralized strategy. And so this was the idea is basically like, hey, we realize that might be very difficult to do. What we actually want to do is concentrate the infrastructure in areas that we think China is less likely to attack. And so these were like industrial manufacturing sites, like semiconductor manufacturing, also other businesses. They also suggested doing this along places where there might be cultural artifacts that maybe wouldn't want to be attacked. And the idea here was that if you could concentrate the infrastructure, you could then concentrate your resources in these areas. So a smaller number of government or private companies could help maintain this infrastructure in the event of a conflict. And so it's kind of a different idea. And I would say that this is the idea that the Taiwanese are most closely aligned to, with some key differences, which I'll talk about in a minute. The last one was the interior strategy. And so I showed you the map of Taiwan a minute ago. That whole center of the island is giant mountains, super high mountains. And so this was the idea hey, we can pull some of this infrastructure closer to the mountains, which are sort of riddled with caves, and that's where like a lot of their military fallback positions are. And we can build up that infrastructure there, and then that will keep it safer for longer in the event of an attack. Of course, that would actually mean that a lot of people would have to move to the interior to actually use it. But it was an idea that came up. That terrain is extremely difficult to operate in. These are rugged mountains. And so this would obviously be very expensive. And it would just be very hard to get to things that broke or needed to be repaired. But anyway, that was one of the other strategies. So 3 strategies and 65 recommendations is what they came with. So we brought the game to Taiwan.
We were invited to come to Taiwan to play the game.
We
We just
were
want to be
invited.
clear on that one. We are not actually allowed to just travel freely to Taiwan as government employees. So we were invited.
Fair enough.
Yes.
It was. We were invited to Taiwan by their Ministry of Digital Affairs. They hooked us up with CyberSec, which is their like large cybersecurity conference. So CyberSec 2025 was like 20,000 folks. So it was a big event. And we played the game. We played several iterations of the game. Some were with the government. Others were with cybersecurity experts from their industries and academic institutions. We also played, we had a version of the game that we played on the floor just with more general participants, which you can see there in the picture. And all told, that we, I think, played with about 160 people over 9 games. And so the things we learned in Taiwan, or reinforced for us, was first is that the government is very focused on this issue, right? They are very interested in building communications redundancy and power resilience in the event of conflict. I mentioned the centralized strategy before. They are actually, this surprised us, they are way less focused on keeping their industries secure. And this even includes the people who are from those industries. They were all far more concerned about emergency services, medical, police, fire, and the lot. That was where they thought that this infrastructure and the resources should be concentrated, which makes a lot of sense. When you're from this place, you're more worried about your families than you are your sort of businesses. They also felt like they had a pretty good handle on how to keep their businesses running because of COVID and some other things. The other thing that we learned, which I think would be of interest to many here, is that so the government realizes that they can't do this on their own, right? They don't have enough resources, all those types of things. And so their official government strategy is actually to bolster their cybersecurity firms, their domestic cybersecurity firms. So when we went to CyberSec, it's this huge conference with people running around and vendors, just like you'd have here at another big one. Yeah, you see a couple of the US ones, the big names, they're there as well, but they have a whole host of their own domestic cybersecurity firms. I think T5 is one of the biggest ones, and they are promoting that and trying to build that up so that to give them business, but also to have more people in their society who can help out with cybersecurity or maybe even serve in the reserves if something does go down. Yeah, super interesting. They're very concerned about where they should store their data. Should they keep it onshore? Should they move it offshore just in case data centers are attacked? And they, like many countries in the world, have some budget shortfalls. There's some disagreements between the people, the ruling party and their parliament. And so they suffer from all of that just like everybody else does. One thing that concerned me while I was there is, and this is something we see kind of everywhere, was this sort of lack of emphasis on renewable energy cybersecurity. It may have been happening in the background, but when we talked about potential threats to that, given the fact that they're moving heavy into that sphere, there was not a lot of conversation about the cybersecurity threats to that. So we see that as a potential vulnerability sort of going down the line. So last slide here, and then I think we can take some questions. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure,
go ahead.
Sure.
Go for it.
So first, I want to say that this is not just meant to be sort of informational in a casual way. Despite the fact that Taiwan is trying to build its own skill and its own industry to buttress and keep their industrial control system safe, they can't move fast enough. They literally can't. And so we found, and one of the reasons we were invited to come there is we found them deeply interested in engagement from anybody who's interested in helping in any possible way. And so in that sense, if you can go back to your bosses, right, and say, look, hey, do we have a footprint are we interested in helping? Do we have a footprint in Taiwan? The Taiwanese Ministry of Digital Affairs is very interested in talking to you. And so just take that home and consider that. And then we're also happy to talk about it later. Well, what's next for us today? We're playing the game one last time at DEF CON. All of our games are closed door, not for attribution, so we can't actually tell you who played. Some of you may be in the room. But anyway, but what we are doing is we have a light form of the game. We have gamified it further. The long form, the actual war game itself, is very long and slow and a little boring if you're not actively playing. The short form of the game that Jay invented It's actually quite fun, and it takes about 20 minutes around. Raise your hand if you like playing games. Good. You will come to over there. We're right next to San's certification booth. And come and play the game. It'll take you 20 minutes and get to know the kind of the structure of that infrastructure with us. It is fun. You don't need to know anything anyway, either about Taiwan or about critical infrastructure. Interestingly, you'll learn as you play the game.
Yeah, and I think we're expanding our research agenda. We're going to be looking at sort of regional sort of threats, particularly with the communications cables. And so that's kind of where we're headed next. But we are happy to.
Oh, that's where you were going. Yes,
sorry. But we are happy to take questions because we've got a few minutes.
Next iteration of our research. So we're sunsetting this project, and all the reports are made available. What we're moving into next is subsea and seabed analysis. So if you're a person who thinks about those things, we would love to talk to you. Thank you.
Perfect.